The universe, as it turns out, has a peculiar sense of humor. This becomes especially apparent when you gather the galaxy's most pompous xenobiologists in one room and ask them to discuss the finer points of evolutionary superiority. The annual Interspecies Xenobiology Symposium on Station Kepler 442b was by all accounts the perfect petri dish for such cosmic comedy. Picture, if you will, a chrome and crystal cathedral floating in the void, its halls echoing with the self-important chittering, buzzing and harmonious humming of a dozen species who had convinced themselves they understood the delicate art of survival. The station's environmental systems worked overtime to accommodate everyone from methane-breathing Zyx'tharians to the silicon-based lithoids who required temperatures hot enough to melt copper. The air itself was a carefully orchestrated symphony of atmospheric compromise that somehow managed to smell like ozone, wet concrete, and faintly of vanilla, though nobody could quite explain the vanilla part. Dr. Zyx'thara, a being who looked like someone had convinced a chandelier to pursue higher education, presided over the main conference hall, with the kind of crystalline authority that only comes from having your species discover faster-than-light travel, while still believing the universe revolved around geometric perfection. Her voice resonated through the hall with the musical quality of wind chimes in a hurricane, each word precisely calibrated to remind everyone present that the Vorthans had been studying predator-prey relationships since before most species had figured out fire. "Colleagues," she announced, her faceted form catching the ambient light in ways that were probably illegal in several star systems. "Today we address the fundamental question that has plagued xenobiology for millennia: what truly defines an apex predator?" The assembled academics, and the term was used loosely, considering at least 3 of them had gained their positions through trial by combat, rustled with anticipation. Professor Quin'dalla, whose ethereal nebulon form seemed to exist in a constant state of almost but not quite being there, shimmered with excitement. Commander Thek'mor, whose armored chronite hide could probably stop a small meteor, drummed his claws against the reinforced table in what passed for enthusiasm among his people. And then there was the human. Dr. Elena Vasquez sat quietly in the corner, her unremarkable bipedal form almost comically out of place among the assembled menagerie of galactic evolution's more exotic experiments. She had the kind of face that civilizations tended to overlook, not because it was unmemorable, but because it was so perfectly efficiently average that it didn't trigger any of the usual threat assessment protocols that had kept most species alive long enough to develop space travel. This, as the universe would soon demonstrate, was a mistake of astronomical proportions. "The question before us," Zyx'thara continued, her crystalline voice taking on the tone of someone about to deliver a lecture to particularly slow students, "is not merely academic. Understanding the apex predator of each world provides crucial insight into the evolutionary pressures that shaped our respective civilizations. The predator shapes the prey, and the prey shapes the predator, in an eternal dance of adaptation." Quin'dalla's form solidified slightly, a sign of excitement among her people that roughly translated to sitting up straighter. "Indeed, colleague Zyx'thara, the apex predator represents the pinnacle of evolutionary achievement on any given world. The perfect synthesis of hunt and kill, the ultimate expression of survival refined to its most elegant form." Thek'mor's rumbling voice cut through the philosophical preening like a plasma cannon through tissue paper. "Elegance is irrelevant. The apex predator is the ultimate warrior, the being that stands unchallenged at the top of the food chain through strength, cunning, and honor in battle." The human said nothing. She simply sat in her chair, hands folded in her lap, wearing the kind of small smile that evolutionary biologists should have recognized as a warning sign but somehow never did. "Very well," Zyx'thara declared, her form brightening with anticipation. "Let us begin with the Vortan contribution. On our world of Xylos Prime, the apex predator is the geometric stalker, a creature of perfect crystalline beauty and lethal efficiency." What followed was a presentation that would have been impressive if it hadn't been so thoroughly predictable. The geometric stalker was, as its name suggested, a being of living crystal that hunted through mathematical precision. It calculated trajectory, velocity, and probability with the cold efficiency of a quantum computer, striking with movements that followed perfect geometric patterns. Its prey, according to Zyx'thara's increasingly elaborate descriptions, never saw it coming, because the stalker moved in ways that the primitive visual systems of other life forms simply couldn't track. "Fascinating," Quin'dalla murmured, though her tone suggested she found it about as fascinating as watching paint dry in a vacuum. However, I submit that true predatory excellence requires something more transcendent. The void wraith of the Nebulon homeworld exists partially outside normal spacetime, hunting through dimensions that lesser beings cannot even perceive. It doesn't merely kill its prey, it erases them from existence itself, leaving no trace that they ever lived. The presentation that followed made the previous one look like a children's cartoon. The void wraith was essentially a cosmic horror that had evolved the ability to hunt across multiple dimensions simultaneously. It existed in a state of quantum superposition, allowing it to be everywhere and nowhere at once. Its prey didn't just die, they were retroactively removed from the timeline, their existence unraveled thread by thread until even the memory of them faded from the universe. Thek'mor's response was predictably direct. Impressive, but ultimately hollow. A predator that erases its prey from existence defeats the very purpose of the hunt. On Kronos we have the Stone Render, a being that embodies the warrior's path to its ultimate expression. The Stone Render was, according to Thek'mor's growling narration, a creature that made the other two look like house pets. It stood 3 meters tall, with hide that could deflect energy weapons and claws that could carve through starship hulls. But more than its physical attributes, the Stone Render hunted with honor. It announced its presence to its prey, gave them a chance to flee or fight, and engaged in single combat that could last for days. Victory was earned through strength, cunning, and the warrior's spirit. Each battle, Thek'mor explained, his voice carrying the weight of ancestral pride, is a ritual, a test of worthiness. The Stone Render doesn't simply kill, it elevates both predator and prey to their highest potential through the sacred act of combat. The 3 presentations had taken the better part of an hour, each species outdoing the others in terms of exotic lethality and philosophical complexity. The assembled academics murmured and chittered their approval, already composing the papers they would write about this historic exchange of knowledge. And then, with the inevitable weight of cosmic irony, all eyes turned to the human. Dr. Vasquez, Zyx'thara said, her crystalline form somehow managing to convey condescension despite having no facial features to speak of. We are, of course, curious about your world's contribution to our discussion. Earth is quite young, cosmically speaking, and we understand that evolution there has been somewhat limited in scope. Elena Vasquez looked up from her notes, and for just a moment something flickered behind her eyes, something that should have sent every survival instinct in the room screaming warnings about persistent predators and the dangers of underestimating anything that smiled that calmly. Instead, she simply raised her hand. The gesture was so unexpected, so utterly mundane, that it took several seconds for anyone to process what they were seeing. In a room full of beings who communicated through crystalline harmonics, dimensional phasing, and ritual combat postures, the simple act of raising a hand was almost aggressively ordinary. "I'm sorry," Quin'dalla said, her form flickering with confusion, "but what exactly are you indicating?" Elena's smile widened slightly. "You asked about Earth's apex predator. I'm raising my hand." The silence that followed was the kind that usually preceded either enlightenment or catastrophic misunderstanding. Given the universe's sense of humor, it was probably both. "I don't understand," Zyx'thara said, her voice losing some of its crystalline certainty. "Are you perhaps indicating that you wish to speak, or is this some primitive gesture of submission?" "Oh, I'm indicating," Elena said, her voice carrying the kind of casual confidence that made smart people nervous and overconfident people curious. "I'm indicating that I'm Earth's apex predator. We all are." The laugh that erupted from Thek'mor was like the sound of tectonic plates having a disagreement. "You, a soft-skinned biped with no natural weapons, no armor, no enhanced sensory organs? You claim to be an apex predator?" Elena's smile didn't waver. "I claim to be the apex predator, not just of Earth but probably of anywhere humans have decided to visit, which, given our expansion rate, is becoming a significant portion of the galaxy." "Ridiculous," Zyx'thara said, though her harmonic resonance had shifted to a frequency that suggested she was less certain than she sounded. "Humans are clearly prey animals. You have forward-facing eyes, yes, but your bodies are soft. Your reflexes are slow, and your sensory capabilities are laughably limited. You can't even see properly in the dark. You're absolutely right, Elena agreed cheerfully. We're terrible at being predators in the traditional sense. We can't run very fast, at least not in short bursts. We can't see in the dark. We don't have claws or fangs or armored hide. We can't phase through dimensions or calculate geometric perfection, or survive in hard vacuum. She paused, and something in her expression shifted, not dramatically, but enough to suggest that the universe was about to reveal one of its more elaborate jokes. But here's the thing about being an apex predator, she continued, her voice taking on the tone of someone explaining something very simple to very intelligent people who had somehow missed the point entirely. It's not about being the biggest or the fastest or the most elegant. It's about being the best at staying alive and making sure everything else doesn't. Quin'dalla's form solidified with interest. Explain. Well, Elena said, settling back in her chair like someone preparing to tell a particularly good story, let me ask you something. Your void wraith, terrifying certainly, exists in multiple dimensions, erases prey from existence, very impressive. But tell me, how does it handle persistence hunting? Persistence hunting? Quin'dalla's form flickered. I'm not familiar with the term. Oh, it's simple, Elena said with the kind of casual tone that suggested it was anything but. You pick your target and then you just follow it, not fast, not dramatically, just steadily, relentlessly for hours, days, weeks if necessary. See, most predators are sprinters. They rely on speed, surprise, overwhelming force. But humans? We're marathon runners. We can track wounded prey across continents, following blood trails and broken vegetation and disturbed earth for literally days without stopping. The room had gone very quiet. Even the station's environmental systems seemed to be holding their breath. Your prey runs, Elena continued, her voice taking on an almost hypnotic quality. Fast, desperate, terrified. It uses every trick evolution gave it: speed, camouflage, terrain, other predators. And it works. For a while, the prey escapes, finds a safe place, rests, drinks, maybe even sleeps. And then it hears something. Footsteps. Steady. Unhurried. Getting closer. Thek'mor's claws scraped against the table. This is disturbing. Oh, we're just getting started, Elena said, her smile widening. Because here's the really fun part. We don't just hunt animals, we hunt each other. For sport, for practice, for fun. We invented games where we deliberately split into groups and try to outthink, outmaneuver and outlast each other. We call it strategy and tactics and competition, but at its core, it's just humans hunting humans, with arbitrary rules to make it more interesting. She stood up, and somehow the simple act of rising from her chair seemed to fill the room with an entirely different kind of energy. Your geometric stalker calculates perfect mathematical approaches, she said, beginning to pace, with the kind of measured steps that suggested she was warming up to her subject. That's impressive. But humans, we calculate imperfect approaches. We plan for failure. We build redundancy into our redundancy. We don't just have plan A and plan B, we have plans C through Z. Zyx'thara, Elena said, turning to address the crystalline being directly. Your stalker moves in perfect geometric patterns, beautiful, efficient, predictable. But what happens when its prey doesn't behave according to mathematical principles? What happens when the prey does something completely irrational, self-destructive, or impossible? The crystal being's form dimmed slightly. It would adapt, recalculate. And while it's recalculating, Elena said, her voice taking on an almost predatory satisfaction, the human is already moving. Not to where the prey is, but to where the prey is going to be, not based on mathematical certainty, but on intuition, experience, and the kind of pattern recognition that comes from millions of years of hunting things that don't want to be hunted. She turned to Quin'dalla. Your void wraith erases prey from existence. Impressive, but what happens when the prey doesn't care about existing? What happens when the prey is willing to sacrifice itself to ensure the predator fails? What happens when the prey turns the hunt into a war of attrition, where victory isn't about survival, but about making sure the other side loses? Quin'dalla's form flickered uncertainly. That's not how predation works. It is for humans, Elena said with cheerful brutality. We're the species that invented mutually assured destruction as a form of deterrence. We're the species that will literally burn our own world down rather than let someone else have it. We're the species that looks at a no-win scenario and says, challenge accepted. She faced Thek'mor, and for the first time the armored warrior actually leaned back in his chair. Commander, your stone render fights with honor, single combat, warrior to warrior, strength against strength, noble, traditional, doomed. Doom? Thek'mor's voice carried a dangerous edge. Doomed, Elena confirmed without hesitation. Because humans don't fight fair. We don't fight with honor, we fight to win, and we define winning as the other side stops being a problem. You want single combat? We'll bring a team. You want a fair fight? We'll change the rules. You want to test strength against strength? We'll test your strength against our tools, our tactics, our ability to convince your own allies to switch sides. She walked to the center of the room, and somehow her small, unremarkable form seemed to dominate the space in a way that the other being's exotic magnificence couldn't match. You want to know what makes humans apex predators? She asked, her voice carrying the kind of quiet intensity that made smart people pay attention. It's not our strength, we're weaker than most species. It's not our speed, we're slower than most. It's not our senses, we're nearly blind and deaf compared to most galactic life. She paused, and her smile took on an edge that would have made a shark proud. It's our absolute, relentless, utterly unreasonable refusal to accept that anything in the universe is better than we are at staying alive. The room was silent except for the hum of the station's life support systems, which somehow seemed louder than before. Every other species in this room, Elena continued, has evolved to fill a specific ecological niche. You've become perfect at one thing, and that perfection is your strength, but it's also your weakness, because perfection is brittle. It breaks when the environment changes, when the prey adapts, when something unexpected happens. She gestured to herself with both hands, a movement that somehow managed to be both humble and terrifying. Humans evolved to be generalists. We're not perfect at anything, but we're good enough at everything. We can't outrun a horse, but we can run longer than a horse can. We can't outswim a fish, but we can hold our breath long enough to spear the fish. We can't outfight a bear, but we can make tools that let us kill the bear from a distance. But that's not the scary part, she added, her voice dropping to a conversational tone that somehow made her words more unsettling. The scary part is that we don't stop. Ever. If you beat us, we learn from it. If you kill us, our species learns from it. If you destroy our world, we'll find another one. If you erase us from existence, we'll figure out how to exist anyway. Elena walked back to her chair, but she didn't sit down. Instead, she stood behind it, her hands resting on the back with the kind of casual confidence that suggested she was completely comfortable in any situation. You asked about Earth's apex predator, she said, her voice taking on the tone of someone delivering a final verdict. Let me tell you about Earth's apex predator. Humans took a world covered in creatures that were bigger, faster, stronger, and more dangerous than we were, and we made them extinct. Not through superior evolution, but through superior persistence. We didn't outcompete them, we outlasted them. We didn't outfight them, we outthought them. We didn't outrun them, we outstubborned them. The beings in the room were very, very quiet. We turned wolves into dogs, we turned wild grasses into wheat, we turned hostile environments into gardens. We took a planet that was actively trying to kill us and we made it comfortable. And then, because we're humans and we get bored easily, we decided to see what else was out there. She gestured toward the viewport, where the stars wheeled in their eternal dance. Every single human in this galaxy, she said, her voice carrying the weight of species-wide certainty, is the descendant of creatures that survived ice ages, plagues, wars, disasters, and every other catastrophe that existence could throw at us. We're not here because we're the strongest, or the fastest, or the most elegant. We're here because we're the species that looked at an impossible situation and said, yeah, okay, but what if we try anyway? Elena finally sat down, folding her hands in her lap with the same casual demeanor she'd maintained throughout the entire presentation. So yes, she said, her smile returning to its original deceptively pleasant configuration. I'm Earth's apex predator. We all are, not because we're perfect hunters, but because we're the species that turned hunting into an art form, a science, a philosophy, and a way of life that we've refined over millions of years of practice. The silence that followed was pregnant with implications that none of the other beings particularly wanted to examine too closely. Zyx'thara began, her crystalline voice wavering with uncertainty. I believe I need to reconsider some of my assumptions about predatory classifications. As do I, Quin'dalla whispered, her form flickering with what might have been fear or fascination. Thek'mor said nothing, but his claws had stopped drumming against the table. Elena looked around the room with the kind of benevolent satisfaction that teachers get when their students finally understand a particularly difficult concept. The really ironic part, she said, her voice returning to its original cheerful tone, is that we spent so much time and energy becoming the ultimate predators that we eventually got bored with it. These days, most of the apex predators on Earth are protected by humans. We put them in zoos. We study them. We write laws to keep them safe. We became so good at being predators that we decided to become protectors instead. She stood up, gathering her notes with the kind of efficient movements that suggested the presentation was over. We're still apex predators, she added, almost as an afterthought. We just decided that the most interesting prey in the universe is the universe itself, and so far, we're winning. As the other beings filed out of the conference room with the kind of disturbed silence that follows profound philosophical revelations, Elena remained behind, organizing her papers with the same methodical precision that had characterized her entire presentation. The universe, it seemed, had played its joke after all. The question hadn't been about what Earth's apex predator was, it had been about whether the rest of the galaxy was ready to find out. Based on the expressions of the departing delegates, the answer was a resounding no. But then again, as Elena had so cheerfully explained, humans had never been particularly concerned with whether the universe was ready for them or not. They were here anyway. And her hand was still raised,